It's quiet right now. All right. We just want to make sure that there's actually live people. So for those who are here, definitely definitely type in something saying hello.
There we go.
There we go. We had a little bit of a lag. So we got Shelter Island, New York. You know, I've never been to Shelter Island. I'm from New York. We got LA, California. Okay. All right. U.S. citizen, but is visiting Japan. Talk about dedication to the craft. We got Paris, France represented. We got Canada. Got another New Yorker from the city. What part of the city, Rod S? We got Dallas, Texas represented. This is great. All right. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to kind of see all these faces that are being a part of what we're about to do. We have someone really special for you guys. So definitely excited about what's going to be happening. Let me go ahead and just get my windows set up, you know. All right. Patrick, are you ready to do this?
I'm ready to go. I'm just relaxing to your dulcet tones.
Okay.
I'll wait to be.
All right. Okay. All right, guys. Welcome, webinar attendees. All right. Today's webinar is going to be an exciting one indeed. And on a topic so dear to my heart, which is figure drawing. I don't know if you guys knew, but that was my bread and butter and love for so many years. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of this webinar. And this, by the way, this webinar is for those who are interested in growing their art foundation skills or getting your next level skills as an artist. So I just want to encourage you, the range. We're definitely going to be covering a variety of topics within the realm of figure drawing. So I look forward to this. My name is Frank Cordero, and I'm the host of today's webinar. For those who don't know me, I'm a traditionally trained artist in drawing and illustration. I'm a former cleanup animator from Disney, former concept and associate art director from EA, freelance 2D and 3D artist, and currently doing content marketing for CG Master Academy. All right. And we are excited to have you guys to meet an award-winning artist. His name is author, teacher, and artist Patrick Jones. And let me go ahead and get my slides up just to make sure that we are getting some visuals to kind of share with you guys. All right. And let's go switch screen and let's go ahead and get that. Yes. All right. View and present. There we go. Can you guys see me there? There we go. Cool. All right. So this is obviously Anatomy of Style with Patrick Jones. All right. And by the way, this webinar is presented by CGMA, the leading online school for art, games, and animation and the VFX industries. Okay. And basically, CG Master Academy is a leader in online digital arts education. And CGMA always strives to offer artists the highest quality education through the most affordable, accessible, and relevant courses in the world. As a team founded by artists, for artists, we're committed to enabling you to become a better artist by learning from the industry's best. All right. And speaking of industry's best, I want to introduce you guys to Patrick Jones. All right. And Patrick Jones, again, award-winning artist, author, and teacher. He's been with CGMA for several years now. And anyway, he's a concept artist for multiple publishing companies. He's done work featured in major U.S. exhibitions. He's done painting and drawings for people who are private collectors of his work. And he's also an author of 4 best-selling art technique books. All right. And here's one of them, Oil Painting Masterclass. Beautiful cover, by the way. Oil painting techniques. It's for sci-fi and fantasy. Again, love the cover. And today's topic. He's got a book all about what we're going to be talking about, the anatomy of style. And it's also the name of his class that he teaches at CGMA. And then we got the sci-fi fantasy art of Patrick Jones. And I understand you have a fifth book coming out, right, Patrick?
Yeah, I wrote it during COVID. There it is, drawing from
There it is.
photos.
The
Because
Lying Eye.
the lion eye. That's the better title. But when
Yes.
it comes to, it's all business. It has to be drawing from photos because that's the grabber. The lion eye is too abstract. I'd love it just to be the lion eye, but it's not going to sell as much as drawing from photos. So, drawing
Well, let me
from
tell you
photo.
something. I appreciate what that title means because we'll have a conversation a little bit about the difference between drawing models live and drawing from models from photographs. So, but I'm looking forward to that conversation. This is awesome. All right. And so again, we're going to be doing the Anatomy of Style with Patrick Jones. And we're going to be kind of going into this webinar kind of like Q&A style. So, and the reason why we want to do it that way is just because we got a lot to cover. We got a lot of ground to cover. I also think we want to kind of create some opportunities for the audience to jump in with questions as we have our conversation. So we're going to just jump right into it. I'm just going to say, well, first of all, how the heck are you doing, Patrick?
Great, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. And I understand that you are speaking from the future. So it is basically 9 o'clock in the morning, right?
It is. I get all wired up. I don't know what time it is. When you sent me this link, I had to ask Google about 20 times, what time is it in Los Angeles? Just to be absolutely sure. Because I always get
Yes, I know.
We couldn't be further apart as far as time goes. I think there's one more island. and then that's as far as you can be apart from Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So I know it's always funny when we get people like, from such different time zones chiming in. But anyway, it's my joke, speaking from the future. Anyway,
it is the future.
Well, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about just start off with how you got started. I mean, in your bio, it says you got an early education in Ireland. And maybe you could tell me a little bit about how you kind of got to drawing, how you developed it, and maybe even how your location kind of influenced your artistic pursuits.
Well, that's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, I used to think I was unique. I used to think, there's nobody else like me. Here I am. Nobody knows I exist. I love this art. Nobody seems to care. Everybody's cheering the football team. I have no interest. I'm reading comic books. I'm the nerd. And then I realized that we're legion. There's so many of us, And so when I talk to students, it's their story too. So for me, even though I grew up in a city, you could consider it a small town because we were so isolated. When I grew up, I don't want to make it a sad story, but when I grew up was a war zone. And so we were all encapsulated in the small enclaves because it was dangerous to go outside them. So you could sort of compare it to, New York in the 70s. There was the Bronx and there was Hell's Kitchen and stuff. And
I loved it.
You know what I mean?
I loved it.
You walked down the wrong street. You walked down the wrong street.
Bronx, New York. So I get it.
And so that's what I grew up in.
What town was it, by the way, in Ireland?
It was Belfast in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
And so you walked down the wrong street and you were in terrible trouble and terrible strife. And so we were all stuck in these little even they weren't safe, but there were zones that you knew everyone. Every face was familiar. And so with all those familiar faces was also, I just didn't feel part of it because they called me the professor because I would draw pictures and they would cheer sports, So I'd go and find a little quiet place to draw. And that eventually became just rooftops. I'd go on the top of the roofs of the local shops and businesses because it was the only place in Belfast where there was flat roofs. Everything else was peaked because it was so rainy all the time. I don't know why they had flat roofs. But in the summertime, it was perfect. And I would take all the cardboard boxes that the grocer would throw out the back, and I'd build a little house on these roofs, and I'd take all my drawing materials there. It was just paradise. And my summer seemed to last forever. I'd get my Marvel comics and just sit up there and draw on this roof. That was me. That was my education. So apart from that, there was only the public library, and they were my two zones. That was it. A bus to the public library or climb up to the rooftop and draw. So I was self-isolating way back then, before COVID.
Oh, wow. So in other words, you were getting practice even before you knew you were going to need it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the main thing, Frank, is that I never considered it anything else. I always enjoyed the process. And I think that was the greatest strength for me, in that I didn't have the pressure, because I really feel for my students. They come in with all this pressure on them. They feel they have to be like, I shouldn't laugh, but I hear students and they say, at 22, I'm too late. 22, they're just little saplings. And they think that, that they've got to be somewhere at 22. Well, I never thought that at all. I just went, I'm going to draw today, and I'm going to draw tomorrow, and I'm going to draw the next day. And that was it. And that'll lead you anywhere you go.
It sounded like something that it was more something that gave you pleasure. So you just moved to it naturally, rather than feeling like I have to get up at 6 a.m. to draw, Yeah, it didn't have that heavy feeling. Yeah. So that's when art was fun.
That was when art was fun. And it's funny, Frank, because we were talking earlier about, we had an impromptu conversation that led somewhere very important.
Yeah.
Because I grew my skills organically and grew my career organically, because I never really thought much of the future. I had a vague notion of it. And when I want to be like, and I would want to be like Jack Kirby, or want to be like, the Marvel comic guys really give me the idea that you could make a living out of this. Because it was the first time I saw an artist's name written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby. I thought, and strange not to even think about it, but people drew this, and people are getting credited for it. There's actually, this is a job of some kind. In my dim premortal brain, I was going, there's a job here. It's not just, I can keep on doing this. Because I just assumed that I was going to do this until a job came in, and that was me finished. And so I drew as much as I could. And it was that moment when I realized that it could continue forever. It could be a job. But what we were talking about, Frank, that before I lose that thread, was the whole ethos. Even I'm organically teaching too. And I'm trying to teach what made me an artist and what made me a happy artist. And we encapsulated it yesterday. And I know it seems like a throwaway phrase, passion, but the passion is what drives everything. And I pull back from any comparison to sport. You have to train, you have to do this, because I think that kind of stuff, it's the death of art when you start thinking about, I'm going somewhere, and so I have to hit these notes to get there. Whereas with passion, you're there already. You're already in that moment. And it was what you said, Frank. It's like a relationship. And I go, and I had to pull back from my favorite phrase, that there's art and there's everything else, meaning you can't compare it, but you can compare it to a relationship, because the moment you get angry, your art suffers. The moment you know what I mean? And the moment you feel anxious, your art suffers. And if you get jealous, your career suffers. It's just exactly like a relationship. All the negative stuff is destructive, and all the positive stuff is fruitful. And so that has sort of organically informed my teaching. When I first started teaching, I was quite a tough teacher, because I grew up tough. My dad was.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about your family and what that's like. I mean, were there any artists in the family? Keep going.
There was one. He wasn't an artist, but I'll take that back. That was cruel. He was an artist. I think you're an artist every time you make a drawing. He was an artist, but he wasn't a practicing artist, and he wasn't paid to be an artist. He was my granddad, and he only ever did two things. He drew a cowboy, and he drew it with this was the most important thing. He drew it with gesture. He drew a hat like this, a figure of 8, and then he put a little loop on the top of it. And then he pulled on to get a face and threw a cigarette out the side. And I was amazed by it, because that's magic to me, that he not only drew like we thought drawings were, which were, all the details until it looked like a photograph. He actually shorthanded it to a figure of 8, a little loop, a lump, and a cigarette. He was drawing symbols, and he was making them really interesting and entertaining to a kid. And he drew that so many times, and I was never, ever not amazed. Every time he did it, I went, wow, Granddad. It was equivalent of the granddad stealing your thumb or stealing your nose with this and pretending it's this, I don't know. Did he do that in America, Frank? Did granddads grab your nose and pretend that they'd taken your nose? Maybe that's an
Yeah,
Irish thing. I don't
I
know.
do remember that.
They'd
That was
grab your
also an
nose.
uncle move. That's also an uncle move.
Yeah, they'd do that. They'd grab your nose and then they'd pull it out. They'd say, "I've got your nose," and it was their thumb. And
Yeah.
you'd go. It was like that. You're always amazed by it. So he did that, and he painted a cottage with smoke coming out of it. That was the only two things he ever did, and he did it over and over, and they always amazed me. So there was that. My granddad, nothing else. Everyone else was working class. Yeah, I'll try and put it in context for an American audience, because most of my students are from America. If you went to somewhere like, because I watch a lot of movies, if you went to somewhere like Michigan, where they're producing steel or something, I don't know if they do there, but I've seen lots of movies where you go to a cold part of the US, and there's a factory town and they're producing steel or they're producing something. That's what my childhood was like. It was like that. Everything was about automation. It was about, if you had a job, nobody had jobs, but if you had a job, it would be to produce something practical that people could use, or there was no point in you being there. There was no other job for you. To say you were going to be an artist was just a ridiculous notion.
It was definitely radical for your context and how you grew up. I get the understanding of that. I know that, when you're young, sometimes, you get it's so cute that he's drawing, look, he draw a bird, or it's like you're in a magic act or something like that. Yeah. And they just kind of make a big deal, but it's only when you start getting older and he's like, wait a minute, he's a teenager and he's still doing it. What's wrong with him?
There's something wrong with him. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Oh, they nurture you. They nurture you when you're a child. Once you get to a teenager, they go, are you still doing that? Get real. That's when the love ended. The love only lasted during the first part.
Yeah.
If only it continued.
Yeah. It's amazing how much we have in common. And just so you know, this is a good segue because, I grew up with Marvel comics myself. I think I could swear we're like brothers from other mothers in some ways for at least our early childhood. But for me, it was, the X-Men titles when John Byrne, Terry Austin were drawing. It was the early Daredevils with Frank Miller, when he was doing it. It was, Bob Layton when he did some stuff on Iron Man. These are my heroes that made me want to draw and read. And, they sort of usher in that passion, so to speak. And the reason why I bring that up is like you had mentioned that Boris Vallejo and Frank Frazetta were early artistic inspirations for you.
Yes.
What inspired you about the work they did? And if you have any, do you have any other art heroes beyond them? I imagine you do, but those two you kind of mentioned prominently in your bio.
I have lots. Will I share the screen, Frank? I've got some
Yes,
stuff.
Please go ahead. Let's give our audience, a little bit of visuals along with our talking heads.
Well, I put together some stuff yesterday about that, the influences I have. Now, let me see. There we go. In there. I know it takes a little moment, but you should see a screen now.
Oh, yeah. I see a ton of thumbnails.
All right. So I'm going to open one, and I'm going to show you the one that changed everything right here. This one.
Oh, my God. I even think I have that. Oh, my God. I think I even have that. Holy smokes. I think I own that.
Savage Sword of Conan.
Yeah.
Now, when I got that title, I couldn't afford $1. That's $1 there. So in where I grew up in Ireland, that was 50 pence. We didn't have 50 pence, not children. We didn't. Well, what was I, 13 or something? I didn't have 50 pence, but my Uncle Jim did. So I'd go around to my Uncle Jim. He read comics, and I said, "Have you seen the new Conan, the Savage Sword?" He says, "No." I says, "Oh, funny, I can't remember the full conversation, but I wrangled 50 pence out of him to go and get the magazine for us, for the two of us." So I went down to the shop, 50 pence, and the woman wouldn't sell me it because it was a Catholic neighborhood. Crazy. And once again, I relate very much to the north of America, where you've got sort of a lot of, there's a lot of nudity's bad kind of thing in certain places. And it was like that here, you know, we're a big religious community. She wouldn't sell it to me because of this woman in the background. She was all whispers. Anyway, I said it was for my Uncle Jim, and she eventually, you know, took the 50 pence. And that was it. That was the moment. And what was so important about this was I thought I was going to be a Disney artist. I thought I was going to draw cartoons, because that's what I was drawing lots of, with ideas of being a comic book artist. But Disney were very influential to me because of Pinocchio. When I saw Pinocchio, I just went wild for it, and still think it's the best movie they ever produced. But this one, when I saw that and saw that signature in the corner, Boris, I went, what? This is I couldn't believe that there were modern artists painting in oils. I thought that was the past, because in Ireland where I grew up, there was no old art in the galleries. There was only modern art. There was only, you know, basically stripes and lines and squares. That's all there was. The museum was called the Modern Art Museum, and that was it. And so to see this was just amazing. And I went, once again, marvel, crediting the artists, said cover art by Boris Vallejo. And I went, I want to do that. And it changed everything. I'm going to do this. And that was it. That was the moment right there. Let me just get something, Frank.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and, you know, just so you know, I'll just kind of add on to that. John Buscema a lot of times did the interior work for Conan.
Yeah.
And he was like sort of one of my bookends. He actually came out with a book called, and you probably are aware of this, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Yeah. And that was like, you know, things opening up. And he talked about drawing in a way that I got. So he was literally my first drawing instructor. I wonder if I can get, so How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I still have that first comic. I bought it in the 7th grade. So I think we're about the same age.
I'm older than you by a long shot, Frank.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, by a long shot. When you were telling me all of those artists and writers, John Byrne and stuff, I was going, yeah, that was the next generation.
Really?
It was, yeah.
Okay. I'll share with you. My birth date was 1969 in January.
Yeah, you keep that yourself there, Frank. But
older than I look.
Well, it's a short moment between us. But what it was a point where you were still a teenager and I was working in the workforce by that point.
Wow.
So at that point I was out of the house. Basically in Ireland, you were out of the house at 16. As simple as that. If you had a back that could carry heavy stuff, you were out at 16. It was as simple as that. And so in fact, I was out at 14. My dad didn't finish. I kept going to school, but in the summer holidays, unlike America and unlike anywhere else, Australia as well, we had 3-month holidays as children from school.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
It was brilliant because we had such miserable weather that for 3 months, that's as much summer as we could possibly hope for. It might not have been as long as 3 months, but it was within a 3-month range. And during that time, every kid had the time of their lives because we had sunshine and we had no school. The problem with me was I had a dad that went, okay, there's 3 months, let's get you trained up. And he would take me to the building site at 14 and work me ragged for 14 hours a day. And you'd say, you're making that up, Patrick. Once the sun went down, he got the kerosene lights out and he started work again. It was horrific. It was a brutal regime. And credit to him, he was a hard worker. I mean, he really was able to retire youngish, where everyone else was still fighting, to survive bill by bill. He did that, but it was brutal for me, to be in that car covered in cement dust, looking out the back window with all my mates kicking a football around the street in the lovely summer was just devastated. And to think about 40 years of that, constant hard labor was just horrific for me. And because I wanted to do this, it was a big, going back to the first question, what was your upbringing like? It was brutal. It was brutal. And I know that's everyone's lives, lives are hard. Well, but for an artist to imagine 40 years, my dad was a plasterer, drywall. To imagine 40 years for a creative spirit like I was, grabbing a hawk and trowel and spreading cement onto a wall constantly for 40 years. Imagine that vision of a gray space for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was, if it was prison, there'd be a riot, you know? That's just torture. And so I had to get out of it. But I went off on a tangent there because I wanted to bring something back there, Frank. And it was this, based on that cover. Look.
Oh, you have it. There you go.
See it? but look on the side here. Oops. So everything's back to front right there.
Oh, really?
To Patrick from Forest.
If we switch cameras, let me go ahead and just kind of let me go to the share screen. Let me just go back and go back to camera view so you can kind of make it bigger. There you go. Show us again.
There it is.
Wow. You got him to sign it.
From Boris. And that's
beautiful.
That's the 50 pence cover. That's it right there.
I'm sure it's worth a little more than 50 pence now.
It survived. It survived the trips. Imagine I packed a suitcase everywhere I went, and that was always in it, that magazine. And I eventually turned up at Boris's door because he invited me back to his place. Eventually ended up there and stayed with him. And
is this in London?
Oh, Boris? No, he's in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Oh, so he was in. That's right. So you did say that you were in Pennsylvania. So that. Wow, that was a shift in landscape, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, there was a shift in time as well, because it was 30 years later. So 30 years later, following that dream, based on that cover, and me and Boris are the best of friends now. We're a couple of guys. So you can crush the world down into a small sphere like this, because we're not a big herd, and so we will find each other, you know. And I didn't stalk him. Well, I kind of did, you know. I heard he was.
Little romance there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like a relationship again, Frank, isn't it? Yes. You know, we all pursued the loves of our lives, you know, and it's a tricky game. You know, if you're too eager, you know, it's going to show. And if you're too relaxed, that's not going to work either. It's very, very tricky. And so when I met Boris, I had to basically say, it's just another guy like you, you know? He's not a god. He's just another guy like you. Now go and talk to him and tell him you like your work. That's the attitude I had to have to go and make it work, and it worked. I went, okay, he's just a guy. I'll go and talk to him and tell him. And as I was doing that, I was talking to another guy who also loved Boris, and he was going to go and talk to him too. These are two grown men at the back of a convention center going, I'm going to do it. You're too eager. Stop. No, I'm going to do it. No, I can't do it. He says, you have to do it. And he's pushing me forward. I says, don't push me. I love you. You're making it worse. No, we have to. The time's right.
Oh my God.
It was terrible because, you know, there's other people wanting his attention too. We're waiting for it to be a clear, you know, walkthrough. And this guy eventually left, and there was Boris just sitting there by himself, and we went up and talked to him. And that was it. Me and Boris, best of pals now. Same every year.
So,
Wonderful.
I mean, it's amazing to kind of see that story arc with being inspired, not by the person, but just by his work. And then for that to kind of end where you basically meet him and then you start a new leg of the story and literally have a relationship with someone who now is a peer rather than just a hero that you put on a pedestal. And that's special. That's absolutely special. So, there's a lot of people like that, I guess, in a lot of our lives, you know, in the different areas of drawing that we pay attention to. So,
yeah, absolutely. And with conventions, you can go and meet them, you know? So
that's true.
And in a way, if I look back on it, it wasn't that remarkable. But if you'd have told me on that rooftop as a kid, reading that magazine, that you're going to meet this guy one day, and not only that, you're going to exhibit with him, it would be just... your fireworks would have been going off in your mind. You go, don't be ridiculous. Like my dad went, you know, when I said to him, I'm going to be an artist, he went, if you could have seen a freeze frame in real life, that was it. And I said to my dad, I'm going to be an artist. And it wasn't just as a child, it was as a grown man with my bags packed, you know, a serious statement. If you'd have seen his face, it was just like that. Because he cared for me. Brutal as he was, he cared for me. But he didn't want me to do that, you know. That's not going to. He actually said the words or something equivalent. That's not going to happen.
Wow.
But by that point, I'm a grown man, you know. You might say grown man at 18. Yeah, the shackles are off. Once you're 18, that's it. I can walk out that door and become an artist, but I didn't want to do it that way. I didn't want to leave like that, where it was a conflict rather than, wish me the best of luck, Dad. He would have done if it was war. He would have said, I'm off to fight in Germany against the Nazis. And he'd go, well, the best of luck, son. That'd have been fine. But I'm going to be an artist. No, ain't gonna happen.
It's interesting though, the fear that parents have for their kids. I know my dad was challenged the heck out of me. I was still living at home when I went to college. When I graduated college, I hadn't gotten work right away in my field. I was still working at the museum, and I kind of confessed my dream of wanting to become, an animation or film director. And he looked at me square in the face and he said, "You're not even getting work in what you studied." Yeah. It's the first time that I actually told my dad something that was probably not the most respectful thing that you would do to your father. But a few months left, I knew I had to leave. And that was it. It was just, that was the shove out of the nest, so to speak, that conversation. And I think it's interesting to hear your story in how you have to literally show what's possible just by taking a chance on your own dream. Yeah. And, years later you win them over, but man, it's scary in the beginning.
Isn't that interesting, Frank? Almost identical stories. Now, how many more are there like that?
I don't know, but this is like fascinating. It's like strict, I did the Disney thing. You did the Boris thing, but all right, cool. I want to kind of shift gears because I know for the audience,
yes, absolutely.
This is about the anatomy of style, and
it's not just us two shooting the breeze.
Yeah, I know. It's we're gonna work in some content here, and I promise, the audience here that we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about some stuff. Yeah. One of the things I remember growing up as a kid is that you had to learn anatomy, and there's a variety, a slew of anatomy books that have been created with a sliding spectrum of those created by artists themselves, that have what I call a point of view about, how you create form and think about form in the human body. And then you have another sliding scale where it's completely the opposite end, where there's no point of view. It's all photographical or even medical, dare I say. Yeah. And, that sliding spectrum of everything in between. So I guess my question is, how important is anatomy in your work when it comes to how you go about expressing the things you care about in figure drawing?
Yeah. Well, let me share a screen again, Frank. Let me have a look in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can do that now, yeah?
Yes, you can do that.
All right. Because I was always better with pictures, when I'm deciding anything at all.
Yeah. Let's go. Let's show some pictures.
Let's
No, I'm convinced there'll be some light bulb moments for people who are in this audience, because if they're even, coming to a webinar like this, they must have some affinity or love for drawing to begin with. So, yeah. And by the way, guys, if you have questions, please, post some in the Q&A section. I'll be looking for those questions there. So if you have anything for our esteemed guest, Patrick Jones, all right. And we'll try to work them in the course of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to hear from everyone out there. Mm-hmm. Let me just check. This is a new system for me, so I'm a bit hokey pokey with it.
You're doing great.
Let's find out.
Absolutely great.
Okay, thanks, Frank. All right, here we go. All right, I'll bring this up because it's drawing from photos, and so it's basically one of those topics you're talking about. So the questions were, how important is learning anatomy, and what kind of books would I look to for that kind of idea of how to start? Was that the gist of it, Frank?
Yeah, I know that for me, I'll give an example. I mean, Bridgman, when I was first learning how to draw, George Bridgman was huge in the early days of drawing for me. But he definitely had a unique style. Things sort of fell within his sort of way of drawing and his mark making. And I think, his outlook, his philosophy about, proportion, human form, you see that all come through. So it's anatomy, it's artistic anatomy, which is different than photographic or medical source anatomy. It's anatomy with a point of view.
Yeah.
And I do think that if we're going to be artists, to me, the idea is that it's anatomy with a point of view, your point of view. And,
I agree.
I think that's the whole point of your class. So
I
keep going.
I think you put the class into a definite arena that makes sense. Like I say, I've grown it organically as well, but it is that. It's art with a point of view. And so the problem with just learning anatomy by itself is that all your work will look like anatomy. And like Leonardo da Vinci said, don't draw anatomy. And he knew it so well, you would think that seems like the opposite of what you'd expect for him to say. But what he meant is don't show the nuts and bolts, don't show the cogs turning. So you can see me teaching anatomy here, in an atelier method, which I don't really hang in that area too long. I want to branch off of that right away, because that's like anatomy again. If you draw proportions, all your figures will look the same proportion. So here you can see with my class, I'm just measuring out the model quickly and saying, here's what you can use. I call these training wheels, really. If you want to just look at the model and say from here to there is a certain proportion, then put that in your mental art engine and use it later, but don't draw it. Don't be measuring as you draw. So I don't measure as I draw at all. I never use a measure system with this pencil. I measure by eye. And Michelangelo said that. He said, don't measure by the hand, measure by eye. And if Michelangelo said it, then I'm on board. Now
I'm on board too.
So you can see, look at how beautiful the figure can be. It's so feline and just completely fluid. And if you start to measure it, it can only be clunky. It can never be that. And so when I draw a figure like this, you might go, well, that leg is too long, that arc is too much. Nobody really looks like that. And that's the very point of it, is, this is my idea. This is my feeling of that fluidity. If you draw exactly what you see and measure everything that you see, you may as well just show people the photographic reference and say, here, that's got it all perfect. So there's no point in even looking at my drawing, because it can never be perfect. So what's the point in trying to reach that perfection? And if we talk about perfection being, the world is a photograph, and so I'm going to recreate a photograph, go ahead. Absolutely. As long as you've got a passion for it and you love it. But the whole point of my class is that that's just the beginning. It's only the start of it. And I want to recreate that feeling I had as a child, where it wasn't a job. We didn't have to measure things and put it into compartments to get the feedback that is well done. You got it exactly as we wanted you to. I want to basically impart with everyone what I felt then, which was I just draw as I please, and I love it. And whatever comes out the other end of it was all built on love, and it'll all show through. I believe if you draw something and you're not loving it, it's going to be in the drawing. You're going to see it. So this drawing, for maybe for a teenager starting out, or someone in their early 20s that are being taught that you have to get it exactly right, might go, oh, well, there's lots of things wrong with that. But for me, everything's right, because every line, every stroke and tone was a thought. Every single one of them was a decision to do it the way I wanted to do it. And so with that, it can only be love at the end, regardless of what comes of it. And so every line, every tone, all a thought. And every thought was, I'm really enjoying this. I love every moment of this. I talk a lot, by the way, Frank. Please.
No, I'm. You know what? This is your deal. Although I will jump in, believe me. And it's funny because you mentioned the idea of these choices or thoughts. One of the biggest questions my drawing teacher David Pasalacqua would say is, like, he would just ask questions during figure drawing class. He would say, "What is she doing?" And he would have it doing this Italian, accent, and he was part, art teacher, military guy, and Buddha all wrapped up in one. And he would talk like a sailor, cussing and
Yeah.
all that. But he would just get you to think about things. And he would just say, what is she doing?
Yeah.
It was never just an object we were drawing. It was what she was feeling, what she makes you feel. What is
Yeah.
she doing? Everything were verbs. And that changed the way we marked our papers. And, so stuff like that, for me was like gold, So to hear you talk about every stroke is a thought, every stroke, that's like you're creating this beautiful freaking, essay. And it's about this woman, that you are making. And each part that you're putting in there is part of that conversation, which is exciting.
Yeah. That's great, Frank. Yeah, conversation, exactly what it is. And I'm working with professional models here, and I'm taking the photography as well. So I get to know them. I have an extra bonus, and that's that I am not having to cobble photographs together like you do from the internet when you're just beginning. I'm in the privileged position of hiring a model, and not only a model, but the best model. So I think life drawing classes are the greatest thing in the world, because you can go there and you can draw models that are usually not what you expect. I didn't expect models in life drawing to be what they were, which was artists and poets. And when you think about it, of course they are. Who does this stuff? You'll get the odd backpacker working their way through a city to go for some pocket money to go up on their next adventure to Bali or some island somewhere. You'll get them, but still they're adventurers. They're still exciting people. Whereas the likes of Katie here, she's a dancer, she's a performer, they're usually artists. And so they're really happy to be collaborating with what you're doing as well. And so you can share the vision with them. And so I'm sharing this vision with her. I don't give her, I don't give Katie directions. I give her emotions. I say, okay, Katie, so what we have here, you're dangerous, your life fluid is running out. You have to be reinvigorated somehow. She's a vampire. And so I end up with this pose that, is a series of many poses, because I just keep clicking that camera all the time. I see, and roll her through emotions. I'll say in another, because I know her really well. We're friends. And so we ended up with, a ton of footage. But this book, The Lion Eye, is about photo distortion. Look at the distortion in here. See that? Look at that little torpedo knee. So even though I'm drawing with all this passion and everything, I still have to draw a representational figure. It still can be, it can be abstract if you like, but I'm drawing representational. And so it has to look like a figure. So for the first part of my drawing, I have to be realistic and go, okay, we have to put this stuff in a way that when the drawing's finished, it reads, but still has all that passion in it. So for me, the first part is, it is the nuts and bolts, but I still try and draw with rhythm as much as I can. Let me just go through a couple here, and then I'll get a movie up, which describes it better than I'm trying to here. But as we go through here, you can see that the drawing at this point is probably harkening back to what our parents thought we should know as well, or what our early teachers wanted us to know, is you still have to put some hard work in to understand the figure. And that's what the anatomy part is. So we still have to do that, but I put it in the background. I say, okay, that's the, if you like it, the working part of what we're doing. And we learn it so well that we don't have to think about it. And so I've learned so well that I don't have to think about it too much. It's always going to be not easy, but it just gets easier. But if we can get the process and enjoy the process all the way through, like I'm doing here. And by the way, here's a bit of Kirby-esque stuff here. I like Jack Kirby, and I could never understand solid fluid at the same time, and with gesture, and then put in squared edges on the most gestural parts, really subliminal, hard stuff to grasp as a kid. But I teach all this stuff. There's so many things you have to do. But at this point here, it's starting to get into the love stage. We've got all the nuts and bolts in. Mm-hmm. We haven't traced anything. I think that's the death of art. Although, please, ours rules. And by the year, I'm starting to feel that we're heading towards style. Roundabout here, I think. And at this point, definitely, because I'm thinking about the line and the tone. So the move from this stage here to that stage here is just critical in showing who you are. You know, there are two big changes. There's many changes, but at this point here, when you've got through the dirty person stage, then you're starting to show your style. So for me, style is the last thing that comes from all the stages before. If we try and put the style on first, we try to put the polish on first, it's going to be a train wreck. I'll bring up another thing. Frank, you continue to ask questions while I fiddle around in the background here.
Oh yeah,
or open it up for anyone to ask.
One of the questions that was sort of, that came to me while watching the progress of your drawing was, and everyone's temperament, I was trained as an animator, so a lot of decisions that we made happened within a shorter time frame. It was almost like a luxury to linger on a pose for the time that you do. And I think a lot of animators kind of learn to draw within, I call the 2 to 5 minute range, in terms of laying down gesture and that. And then any more time than that, then it's like becoming a more of a study, or more of a, I guess, involved contribution, so to speak. And that can range anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 to 50. I mean, how do you have an average? I mean, do you even think about, like, how long does it take you to do one of these drawings? Because they just seem to go well past that gesture stage, which is very fleeting, but somehow you still manage to keep bottled in the gesture, in the form later. And I think one of the hardest things to do as an artist is to sustain the energy of a drawing. How do you do that? I mean,
another great question, Frank.
Yeah. Is this the video that you were showing, or is this another image?
There we go, right there. And you know that's my class too. Glint and earring, is that right?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. You got it. All right. So you're gonna go, and let's see if we get it. There we go. We're having a little bit of issues with the telecast. Okay, now we're getting some video playback. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be moving. Yes, it's my favorite model, Alana. You'll see me all the time. Alana and Katie are my two go-tos now, and I treasure them because a model's life doesn't necessarily last. Just like a sports player's got 5 years in them, and then they move on to something else. And with Alana now, she's Dr. Breakelman, and
we're having a little bit of issues with some of the audio. Yeah.
The only person she's modeling for is me. Whereas that, you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Am I still there, Frank?
Good. Yeah. Yes, you still are. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to maintain the gesture throughout the pose. And when I worked in advertising, like I said, that's when you coast and get slick and you lose your skills. And so what happened, they had a machine called an artograph. And the US, I'm not sure what it's called, artoscope maybe or something, but basically it's a place that you put a photograph underneath and you go inside into a dark area with curtains and you trace the photograph. Does that ring any bells?
I've heard of that, and yeah, I mean, it always seemed kind of contrived, but I mean, I know it existed. I never really got a chance to experience that. So tell us more.
You were lucky. So it was spoken in hushed tones. When I first went into a professional studio, there it was, and I'd never heard of it. And the guy in the studio was really slick. He drove a sports car, an artist with a sports car, and he was only in his 20s. And I went, how do you do that? I've been living in rags here, doing the same thing. And to be honest, I felt I was better than him. The arrogance of youth. I thought I was better than him, and I couldn't understand why he had a sports car, and I had to forge my train pass to get to work. I couldn't understand how he did that. And he says, get yourself under that machine. And basically, what you did was you cut the time for an artwork down by 100th, almost right down to What would have taken you an hour will take you 5 minutes, something like that. And it was basically this stage of, and people would trace the drawing all the way to the finish. They'd just trace, they'd go in there and they would trace through paper, not tracing paper. So you end up with watercolor paper, if you liked, with a photographic image on it in pencil, or a photographic image in pen if you wanted. And so for me, it was just horrible. I felt this was not the life I expected as an artist, to be in that dark room with my ass blowing out in the wind there, you know, because you just put your head in there. It's like a puppet show, and people don't see you for an hour. But sure enough, an hour later, you've cut yourself a couple of $100 tracing a photographic image, which advertising agencies hadn't got a clue how you did it, and they didn't care. They just went, wow, that guy can draw, when all you did was trace. And so he would use that, and they would be in there day and night, and it became a crutch. And that's what I mean. People 15 years in advertising, they're getting slicker, but they're using all those tricks, and they still sell it. They're still selling, a projector. You project your work on it, and you trace the work. The secrets of the old masters. What? Leonardo da Vinci didn't have an autograph. Some of them did. Canaletto, I think, did. You know, they fashioned one out of a lens in dark rooms and stuff. But the thing is, you can see me draw here without that idea. And what I discovered when I let it all go, because after a while you rely on it because you're frightened of other people thinking you're not good anymore if you were to go back to the basics again. And that's why people get trapped in a world of tracing for the rest of their lives. But what I found is, when I came back out of that world and wasn't chasing the dollar to pay a mortgage anymore, that there's nothing more beautiful than this. And it's better because, like I say, every line is a thought. Not every line is a drudgery. It's a thought and a passion. And you end up with a better drawing anyway, and really in the same amount of time. Because when you're in that machine, you have to redraw the line about 6 times to get it right, because your hand just isn't as facile as you think it is until you start trying to get things perfect on top of another image. Because there's that slight blur, there's that slight distance between the image and what you're tracing. But, even talking about it's depressing the life out of me. So that's gone, So what I'm teaching is, thank God, I'm teaching not to do that. And you can see right away, it's coming together. It's coming together in the time we've been talking here. Look, there it is, in an easy, relaxed fashion, and loving every minute of it. And so, the idea is, come along, with me for that ride, because you're most welcome. Because I would really feel for anyone that ended up where I was, walking into that studio and going underneath those curtains and having to do that. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I mean, I definitely get it. It's like being forced to trace. I think it was one of the toughest things about being a Disney animation artist when I came in as an in-betweener, is that, your job was to guard the style of the film. And while you did make some drawings, there were times when we had to do these moving holds that would just make your eyes glaze over, because basically you were tracing and your job was to manage line quality at that point. And not necessarily, was it something that you were doing that was creative? Usually the creative drawings are the larger jumps, the breakdowns, the minor key drawings, or if you were lucky to get something that was as chunky as a key, those usually went to the lead key artists to help define those. At least they were able to contribute. So, it's just where you were in the pipeline. So I relate to the challenge of the roteness that can happen, and what's the death of drawing? Something that is tracing, there you go.
But there's definitely skill in it. I don't want to disparage anyone that has to do that for a living, because I did it for 15 years. So there's actually skill in it, because at the end of the day, you can skillfully change those lines on the fly, which is what I ended up doing. But you still weren't learning as much as I'm learning here, studying that photograph, studying that pose, and changing it. Look how I've brought that foot down. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so you have to be able to draw, and it leaches your skills when you're tracing too much. But it's still a skill. There's no doubt about it. Not everyone can do it. And like you were saying, you said a very poignant word there, Frank. You said rote. So you obviously know also rotoscope. those poor Disney artists had to trace every
Literally.
frame
Yes.
of photography, but with the skill to make it animated, an animated line.
That's
But
right.
that must have been grueling, though. That must have been so grueling to do.
It could have been at times. Yes, there were times when it was. It was good to have a good character to draw on, like Stitch or the villain from was it Mulan? Shan Yu. That was fun. But you know, when you're a beginner like I was coming in as an in-betweener, you got like lots of trace overs, lots of moving holds and things that they basically said, you know what, they can let those beginners handle it. The irony is that, you know, those drawings made up the bulk of the drawings in a movie. So they still had to be good.
The in-betweens are going to be the most. But that's a different thing, though, Frank. You know, it's the same but different. The thing is that you're working already with drawings there. And that's, you know, look how much you're learning by osmosis. You know, you've got these key animators. And
design.
The design and so beautiful. I'm talking way back, tracing photographs of businnemen. You know,
I've never actually gotten a chance to work with it, and I'm glad I missed that.
Oh, it was grim. But I'm what am I doing? I should be enjoying this. So let's have a look at that big question, Frank. The big question: how do we maintain the passion and the fluidity of gesture throughout the process? And here it is. Here, even when I'm drawing structure, notice that I didn't draw down to the eye, then the nose, then the mouth. I put in a gestural line to encompass the entire sweep of the face. And so even though I'm drawing structure here, I'm drawing it gesturally. And you can see at this moment here, it is getting into that clunky structure stage. See that? This is still beautiful and fluid, but this is getting clunky. At some point, we have to address the anatomy. And that, once again, is the anatomy of style. Learn it, break it down into structures like I'm doing here, and then it becomes palatable and easier to work with. You know, we don't draw every single ridge. We just get from one point to another, and we've got the basic hump of that scapula going across to that humerus bone. So, you know, there's two bits of anatomy there that maybe when I started off, I had no idea of the names of. It's not really important, the names, but the names do tell us what that is, and it's easier to reference them on the internet, you know, that kind of thing. So when I teach, I do say all the anatomical terms. And you'd think, well, we'll never learn them, but I did. I learned every single one of them. I know them all. I can see the anconeus right in there. You know, I can see the carpi extensor and flexor on each side of the ulna. I can see those things. But at the minute now, it's just a line, a cone, and a curve coming down on each side. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to understand the language so well that you don't have to think about it at all. You know, we're not thinking about the grammar anymore. We're just drawing it. So it's important to understand it, but then to fly off of it. And that's so art is a contradiction. It's many contradictions. So I have to learn the anatomy and the structure to draw the gesture. I have to do that. And I put gesture on every structure. At the minute, there's no gesture really on there. There's just structure. But if I speed across here and put all that journey person stuff in, all that structure, and start putting in the tone. Now look how much more beautiful it becomes with line. Look at that. Once we start to feel it, yes, this is a muscle. This is the tensor fascia bulging up. This is the rectus femoris bulging up. Once we get your hand out of the way, Patrick, once we get let's go over to the sacrum bulging. Once we understand all that stuff, we can put gesture on it with confidence. We can understand it. It's a ton of stuff. There's no doubt about it. That's why the CGMA course is 8 weeks just to begin. You know, I teach further advanced anatomy on my website. And further still, I'm working with Proco at the minute for even more stuff. It's for the rest of our lives. And if we all understand that it's a long thing, it's a long game, then we can take the pressure off and go, this is going to take a long time. And for the students in my class, when they come in and they go, wow, this is tough. You know, yeah, it's tough if you want it to be. But if you enjoy the process, it's never going to be tough. It's going to be enjoyable all the way. And that's what I'm doing. I'm enjoying the process all the way through. And you will be stunned at how much that propels and gears your work as you're enjoying every single process, even the structure, enjoying it and then it just draws itself. You sit back and go, did I do that? You know, the minute you let any of those disciplines go, it falls apart. You know, we still have to adhere to them, but they're in the background. It's an engine. We're running with passion and we're running with style based on the mileage of all the drawing we've done before. So the mileage is up to the student, though. You know, I put the mileage in from that rooftop because I never considered it work. So the mileage for me wasn't work. And if we can do that, if we can get it in our head that the drawing is never work, it'll always be a pleasure from start to finish. And you can see here that I'm enjoying. Here, look up here, Frank. Look at that for a homage. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
That's my granddad's cowboy hat. Do you see it?
Yep, there it is.
Figure of 8 in the little loop right there on that ear from the back.
There you go. Wow.
little mnemonic. I've spoiled that drawing now. It's all you'll ever see now is someone throw a cowboy hat and stuck to the side of that girl's head.
You know, I was going to chime in a little bit about your teaching style. We had a little informal conversation ahead of this webinar with regards to your philosophy on that in terms of enjoying the moment, enjoying what you're doing. And, you know, when I was learning how to draw, you know, and again, you have different teachers, different philosophies in the way they approach how to reach a certain outcome based on, you know, time or changing hands. I know my teacher used to kind of set time limits. We used to do things, everything from 30-second gestures, and we did an hour of those. And then he would say, okay, this is how long 5 minutes feels like, you know, where before our concept of time was different, you know, where we like 5 minutes to take what he would try to say could happen in a minute or two. But I think that he came from a very different philosophical approach to drawing to get certain outcomes. You had mentioned that for you, you don't like to set time limits for students' drawings. I want to know why, in your opinion, why it's important to their development to not feel that pressure, you know, while they're working.
Now that's an interesting point, and it has a contradiction in my reply. And it's this, Frank. I think that gesture drawing is the most important part of everything I teach, because there is a time limit to it. And so, but the thing is, I don't tell. Here's the contradiction broken now. Is you've only got 30 seconds to do this, but don't try and finish it. Okay. So in their mind, they're thinking, oh, I've got only 30 seconds, and pencils start flying across the room. I've only just drawn the head. Well, that's fine. You know, that must have been important to you. So for in those 30 seconds, it brings out what is important in what you see, and eventually it'll be the long line of action, as you know, in animation. It'll be the fluidity. And so within those 30 seconds, and my favorite part of the class, my favorite part of life drawing, is just that initial 30 seconds. And I also call those moments as well, when we do our first drawings, the clangers, because what happens when we go into a room is everyone's anxious for some reason. We're always never 100%. I mean, I'm not 100% doing this drawing here because I have a camera over my head. I have to, you know, make sure that I'm getting my thoughts down clearly. So I can never be the 100% I would be without that pressure. And when we walk into a life draw class, we've got the pressure of, you know, maybe you've never been to this class before, you don't know anyone. You know, usually we're introverted and extroverted people, artists, because we're alone a lot. And then when we meet people, it's a big sudden change. There's all these people around. And so your drawing suffers a little bit. So I like to break the ice with, you know, 30-second drawings and call them the clangers. And we all do our worst drawings in that moment. I says, don't worry about the drawing. Just draw whatever comes out. And what happens is that you get the joy of being allowed to fail, if you want to call it that. But I just think the joy of making marks. They're not failures. Every mark in there is so important because it meant something to you. Like that long leg, you know, that this curve meant something to me to get that in so quick. So your quickest marks are going to be your most joyous marks. And what it also teaches you is what you need to learn. And so if you're doing these joyous marks and all of a sudden you clunk one, you get a clanger going, you clunk, let's say this is often a problem for people getting this brachioradialis to overlap there. So let's say you're going down that arm and you clunk here, you go, oh, I've lost my fluidity. It just means you don't understand this area very well. And so now you've been your own teacher and you've said, go and learn that. go and find out what that is. And, I'll tell you what it is. You know what I mean? But that's what I'm teaching all the time is here's a moment, and here's another moment, and now here's lots of moments, and here's all the moments right here. Now, all those moments take time, but gesture will teach you what's important, and it'll teach you what you need to learn, and it kills all the noise. It goes, and I often call detail and render a black hole, or as we talked before, Frank, render hell.
Yes, I remember your video.
Yeah.
That video right there in the class just spoke to me, and I just remember feeling that conversation in my brain, happening in certain situations where I'm like, I'm getting too caught in the weeds on this. I had a question about, can duration of time impact art quality? You can overwork a drawing. You can actually go past the point, and then start to kill it if you're not working on the things that make it and stay alive.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's so important. And so so what you were talking about, Frank, that teacher, I like him. The thing is that you learn more in the gesture and you learn less in the render. So when we start off, we're excited by the finished product. We're looking at it, we're going, wow, a person did that, that's amazing. And so the first thing you concentrate on is the finish, because that's what you see first. It's reverse psychology. So you're looking at render and you think that's what's brilliant about it. And so you start rendering right away. It's madness, when we should be going right back to the beginning, which was the fluidity and the structure and everything that makes it work. And the render, even though it's taken up most of the time, is the least important of all. So I would suggest that everyone draw lots of starts instead of lots of finishes, because you're not going to have many finishes, because the finish on this is taking up 50%, maybe not 50%, probably 30% of that.
Yeah.
And I do think it gets over rendered. I think it's probably at its best there and gets over rendered here. Still nice.
Funny. I mean, I think you develop ways of, moving beyond that to designing the page and the whole thing. So I think you might be being a little hard on yourself, but I mean, honest, I mean, it's a magic way of kind of keeping the drawing alive. And, and a couple of the students had similar questions. So that's why I figured I'd bring it up.
Yes.
One thing I was going to ask you, because I noticed that we're past 5 o'clock, and I still had a question with regards to your feedback style in the class. And and we had talked about this, and I wasn't sure if this is something that you'd be willing to do. And we don't need to do it with all the drawings that I gave you, but you know what? I'm going to be your guinea pig. I'm going to actually kind of volunteer a couple of drawings that I did. I would love you to just feedback, just to see how you think about it. Things that, you would offer in terms of where student is and what suggestions you might offer for development, to kind of give a sense to our audience what they can look forward to in attending your class when they share work with you.
Absolutely. Well, let's find it. Let me have a look.
And I think I addressed Georgie's question, Madison. Yeah, there's similar questions about gesturing, being stiff, and how do you go from being mechanical to motion? I think you covered a lot of that in their question, so that's great. So
now, what do we see here? Oh, I see. It's that thing again. One picture at a time, I think. Let me get rid of that. All right, so I have to go back in and get the screen for the exact Photoshop file as well. Let me get that.
Yeah.
I thought it would bring up just all Photoshop, Okay, let's go back in. Yeah, that's it. Okay, let me see. Can I flick through this as well? Just have a look. It does. Well, here, let me do a little critique on this one, because it's got photography.
Yeah, why don't you do this? That's fine.
Yeah.
And, if we have time for that, that's great. I consider that a luxury to be had. We could probably even do that offline if we wanted to. I was just...
we'll definitely do it, Frank, because what it generally is in my class is that students come in, they're not usually your level. Your level's very high. It's a very high level. But what I'll usually do is get them to bring in the photo reference. And as you were drawing from webcam, that was hard to do. Well, it was impossible to do. So
Oh,
I'll just quickly go over this and
yeah.
critique it as if I'm the student and I'm just critiquing me that's brought this photograph in. So here's a photograph of Katie, and what I generally do is bring in some affirmations for the student as well. So I'm going to be the student.
Mhm.
So I'd say if this was a student bringing their work out, I'd start with, Patrick, it's marvelous. It's just wonderful, because it always is. It's always marvelous, no matter what level you're at. It's marvelous because you've made honest strokes on paper. You've made an image that I can understand and love for various reasons. So I usually come in with some affirmations, and I'll say, "Oh, I just love the gesture of what you've got in here." This would be my critique of the drawing,
Mhm.
because I don't want to crush anyone's spirit or soul, because I'm not my dad. I'm me. I'm an artist, and I understand the artist coming into the room as a young me, and so I want to understand, where am I going right to begin with, and then where can I improve. And so for me, I would say, this is wonderful, Patrick. This is marvelous that you've gotten rid of what's over here, which is a terrible tangent of a broken arm right there. Now, that there's beautiful gesture in that, but because of this weirdness, we only ever see the photograph as a separate thing. No one's ever going to see that photograph. And so if I was to draw that hand in there over here, it would look wrong. It would just simply be wrong. If it looks wrong, it's wrong, even if it's right. Okay? So that would look wrong. It will, and it does, and it always will look weird coming out like that. So let's say the student did draw the hand, and that would be the thing I would say. I would personally have taken that hand out to maintain this fluidity here, going all the way down the side. That's what I would have done. And I would give myself praise. It's just all praise for Patrick. It's all praise for Patrick. I would say, well done for killing these tangents where everything is basically hitting the same point. That arm is hitting that side of the scapula and rib cage there, and it's creating the illusion of, well, it's maintaining the illusion of 2D space. There doesn't seem to be any depth here because nothing goes beyond this point. And so my, once again, praise for me was, well done, Patrick, for bringing that breast out, that rib cage out, and that hip out beyond these lines.
And
So
and I noticed that right away. And it's funny because that is something that only the element of time, when you have it, you'd say, yeah, if I was drawing that drawing, I know the animator in me would have just like literally just one line down,
yeah,
and that was the whole shoulder, chest, abdomen, boom. We would get that whole shape, C shape, kind of implied C shape going on. And that would just be it. If you had, a couple of minutes to get it down, that would be it. But if you have
yeah,
more time, creating those sort of little rhythms on top of the big rhythms,
yeah.
that's pretty amazing. And I noticed that right away. I was like looking for that. I was like, oh yeah, he's playing the scales.
he's he's playing the scales. That's what it is. Yeah. So if you have a, let me just get this again. If you have a structure, so let's say you have a structure that just simply, see, this is where I was never keen of structures. If I have an arm that does this and a hand that does that, that to me is, it's okay, but you can see what it is. It's just a Saturday morning cartoon, meaning there's less frames per second. It's not Disney. It's not Pixar. So what I want to do is break out of that. I want to, come in here and go in and out of those lines, go in and out of those lines to create this beauty that comes from understanding anatomy, and then we can switch it off and put more gesture on it as we go. So let me have a look at your stuff, Frank.
Yeah, no problem. No, that's great. This is like exciting to see. I'm like, and I remember doing this one in New York. Was with a drawing instructor from Parsons who hosted her own figure drawing workshop at a studio. I know they've been fighting to try to keep it open, When COVID hit, they lost a lot of people, just like a lot of businesses. But I was there for a week, couple of weeks, and I got a
Yeah.
chance to draw this model. It was great. And this was without photo, straight, boom, whatever was there.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And Frank, is that Minerva's Spring Hill studio?
Yes, it is Minerva. You know Minerva. She
I know her
is
well.
amazing.
What a great
personality.
name. Yeah, she's got a great personality.
Yes.
Yeah. I
She was
see
like-
her every 2 years. And she lost half her weight. I remember she had a health scare and lost half her weight. Last time I saw her, I didn't even recognize it.
Wow.
But yeah, and as the studio, have they still got it running?
I still get the occasional email from them. I know it was, a challenge to try to sustain it. I couldn't tell you for sure if it has, but anyway, this drawing was made in her studio. So it's great. We bring her up.
Frank, we probably sat in the same seat because if you got there already, you picked the best seat. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And that's why I picked this one up. It's my favorite, actually, of all the drawings you put in.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now I'll tell you one thing.
Yep.
I'm taking chances. I ran out of room at the top. It would have been nice to have a little bit more paper to get more of her head in. But it kind of, the pose almost kind of gives me that sort of, I can get away with it. But it's like, that's the only reason. The pose looks like I'm a tall model and I'm squeezing into this frame and I'm doing a little peekaboo, but it's like, I'm getting away with it. But technically, I'm getting cropped up there.
Yeah.
So.
And, in the fine art world, that was a great decision because it was unexpected, and so this is fresh and new, and it's also the bold. It's bold, and so we expected you to fit that face in there. The worst thing we could have done was this, get a little head in there like that, and try and. Try and draw it as a tiny little head, which is ridiculous, So you did the right choice, I think. But I love the movement of it. I love and once again, anyone watching this, guys, coming in the course, Frank's a professional artist. So I'm just basically affirming that right here. But I would say what I love about it is that fluid nature all the way through there. And when you're drawing with me, you can see that we can add a finger on there if we wanted to continue that fluid nature.
That's great.
Yeah, you see that?
Yeah.
So what I tend to do, if I'm going to draw an arm, I'll think of the arm all the way from the scapula, from here, that point, all the way to the longest, most gestural thing. And if I don't see a gesture at the end, maybe put one on. That's what I would consider. So for me, you don't always get what you want from the model. She gives you a wonderful pose, and all your skills made that drawing just special. Your decisions to make this line here thin to thick, but also the gradation of it coming down to that point in opposition to this lovely dark line here just makes that whole thing sing. Whereas if you'd have done that same line up here, that same darkness, it would look like a coloring in book. It would look how it lost all its life there when I did that.
Yeah, it's like a lost and found line.
It's a lost edge, one of the greatest things in art. And photography doesn't do that. Well, a great photographer can make it happen, but it's going to be a hell of a lot of work. Whereas you made it happen in a fraction of a second. And all those fractions of a second, they're all little micro. They're micro moments that you have built on through your mileage. So the more you draw, the better you get at this decision making. So that's wonderful. I love how that line fades just before that extreme dark in there, which is just absolutely beautiful. So it's wonderful. Everything about it, I love it. It's an honest drawing, never traced. You can always tell, and has a movement that's basically comes from not having too much time to make it worse, because the problem with photographs, drawing from photographs, is you've got all the time in the world. And if you want to think of it like this, so you can read danger in it, you've got all the time in the world to make all the mistakes in the world. Where in a life draw room, you only got so much time, and so your decision making is clearer because you only have that time, and magically you're going to get a better drawing because you don't have all of that time to get into render hell. So at the moment here, you never entered render hell at all. You didn't have time to do that. And what render there is important. This moment here, up to there, down to here, all of these render moments are important, and they're put in quickly. And so you didn't slavishly spend, an hour getting 20 values all the way across that leg. Just this moment to there is enough to make that read, and make it read actually even stronger, because look at how beautiful and solid all of this dark is down here to highlight that oasis of light up here. Just gorgeous. It's a beautiful drawing.
Thank you.
So for me, the only thing would be could we find more gesture in it, like that finger? So for me, it's just that moment where the model just didn't give us everything we want. And what a brilliant model. She gave us most of what we want. But as artists, what I teach in the Anatomy of Style is we can do what we like. We can add anything we want to the process. We can take anything away from the process, and we'll always end up with something more unique than the other person that's not doing that.
Yeah.
But beautiful, Frank. I love it. Have you any questions?
You know what? I'm just going to thank you for, it's a little professional validation, but also, I have so much respect for everything you're saying. And I love the way you're kind of bringing up some of the things that I could think about moving forward with any of these kinds of drawings. This was probably about a, I don't know, 10 to 12 minute drawing. So, I usually try to work in a way that, makes the most out of the time. But a lot of those early decisions happen literally in the first 2 minutes, and everything else is, that gesture time is like gold. That's like, I know it's going to work at that time. And, if it don't work, then why waste time on a bad design? So, I just thank you so much. And we could spend, my God, we could spend a lot more time just shooting the breeze about your class and this whole thing. But I'm very grateful for that. You could see the difference though in the other drawing when she was just sitting there and planted, very different. That was a long drawing. For me, that was like, 50 minutes. I'm like, what do I do at 50 minutes?
Exactly. And you know what to do with 50 minutes, Frank? You start to render. Render.
And that's exactly it. It was like death by 1,000 little crosshatch cuts.
Yeah. But it sounds like I'm bagging render. Not at all. You can go into render and just enjoy yourself for 50 minutes. But the thing is that you're not going to get those 50 minutes back as far as learning more and more. If you did 20 gesture drawings in that 50 minutes, you will have learned 100 times more than you did in the 50 minutes that you were rendering. Mm-hmm. You are getting a lot of stuff out of the render as well. I mean, this is beautiful, this head up here. It's just wonderful. It has maintained the balance that could easily be lost. It's maintaining this beautiful arc all the way through. What happens with renders, we tend not to have so much, fluidity, but, we can't get away with stuff like that. Well, we can. It's art. It's a contradiction. We can do anything we want. But when we start getting into render and hair up there, there's no fluidity left. That initial, Disney-esque kind of idea of hair where it's got swirls and everything. It's all gone once you start to render it, because, we can't see in there the gesture. So that's what it does for us. What I like to do when I come back to a rendered drawing is try and see that I render my way out of a gestural moment. And it happens a lot. You render so much, you forget what the initial structure was, the initial gesture, and now you're starting to get lost in the render. So I tend to go in and look for the contours again. Can we recontour it? Can we get in? Did we hit all the marks again? Does anything look weird when we start to contour it and feel those moments? Are we still coming forward with that arm? Because render does kill a lot of dimension, which is really bizarre, because it's render that gives us dimension when we use it with clarity of thought. If we were to render all the way across here like that, then this would have no depth to it. We've got to make decisions in render. But you were talking about John Buscema. Let me bring up John Buscema and Alfredo Alcala. Do we have time?
Yeah, I'm going to say let's we're probably going to try to end hard at 5:30, so you
Okay.
know, definitely, but yeah, we always have time for John Buscema.
We've always got time because I want to show, because it sounded like I don't want any negativity in anything I do, because I think all art is wonderful if it's done well.
Yeah.
And I want to just show you render done really well. Not as well as yours there, Frank, but
Oh, please.
close to it.
John, let's go see that one of my masters anyway, from a comic book artist standpoint. You know.
And what it is it's not so much looking at John Buscema, but his inker Alfredo Alcala. Now, for some reason, it's disappeared.
Oh,
all right. So
we're not seeing it on our end, but you can definitely give it a shot. You know, again, we still have.
Oh, I see it. I get it now. All right. Let me go back. There it is. All right. Let's go back in here. And I just want to find, there he is there.
Oh, yeah.
So the Savage Sword of Conan. This was that issue, by the way. So inside that issue, we had Boris on the cover, and then we had these amazing artists, John Buscema with the pencils, and Alfredo Alcala, a Filipino artist, coming in with the inks. And boy, I have never seen render done with such beauty. Look at that rhythm all the way through. So in the hands of an expert, render doesn't have to be hell. And so I enjoy it when I'm in it, but I'm always conscious of the fact that this blocking in black here is more important than all this render. That's just the icing on the cake. That block in and then this highlight here shows us all of the structure and depth of that arm. And everything else is just lovely, fluid motion. Look at these. Who could imagine you could draw grass with such gesture as that and it not look messy or mucky? Just so beautiful. So I just wanted to bring that back up for, let's look at cleaner render. I couldn't understand why John Buscema didn't like Alfredo's inks, because I thought Alfredo's inks were just the best inks there ever was. But here's John Buscema inking himself, and I can see what he means.
It's funny. It's like I like the other guy on his stuff. It's almost like he read his own gesture better than John did.
yeah, he did.
But
I can see. I used to think that John disparaged him because he just wanted his brother Sal Buscema to ink. Keep it in the family. But I can see what John meant is that you can read this much clearer. If you reduce that down, if I'd reduce this down, it still reads.
Yes.
I'd reduce it any more than that. But if we reduce Alfredo's work down, it still reads, actually. It's not too bad, but it gets messy there. See, that's quite, you'd have to blow it up to see what that is.
It's a lot more, I guess I would say, because he's using a lot more texture, to kind of, it becomes a value and then maybe doesn't pop visually nearly as much when you get down to that sort of postage stamp, which is its own exercise, by the way, thumbnailing.
Absolutely.
So
there's Barry Windsor Smith. He's would say, if in other hands that would be over rendered, but not in his hands. But that's very clearly, we read that face, not so much this head over here, but we enjoy getting there through all this beautiful rhythmic render going through. Okay, now I won't waste any more time on that. If anyone wants to
there is no such thing as a waste of time. I realized that you and I could probably like jam for another hour and a half, but then we're like, calling our wives and girlfriends, and
that's right.
So we're gonna be late for dinner, honey. And we don't want that. In your case, it's more like breakfast, so or
brunch.
So I mean, I'm just to me, this is like been heaven, in terms of the webinar. One of the few times I get a chance to kind of, talk shop with someone who I have total respect. And I mean, guys, for those of you guys who's attended this webinar, I hope you guys got something out of it, because I mean, this 90 minutes flew by, and it was 90 minutes of inspiration, information about drawing. We really got into some of the weeds when it came to, and we could have gotten in a lot more. And if you love this conversation, guys, I mean, you really got to like check out Patrick's class. I mean, he's one of the best when it comes to not only drawing, but teaching drawing. And there's something magic about that combination, because it's one thing to know what you're doing, but to have the heart and the mind to be able to translate all the mileage that he's had from drawing and turning it into gems, just gems for you guys, is a feat unto itself, and it separates, artists, in my opinion. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick, for just gracing us with your presence, your time, your work.
Hello.
I left more than half the questions on the cutting floor table.
I know, I saw that. There was a ton of questions, wasn't we?
We had a ton of questions, but they just kind of happened. And this was so fascinating. So I just want to say, on behalf of CGMA, we thank you for sharing your background and insights and techniques and all things related to figure drawing and the anatomy of style. I'm tripping over my own words here because now I'm like running into my, hey, I'm a fanboy.
Well, thanks for being a great interviewer, Frank. Because the fact that you can tear the questions up and throw them away is for me, and what I see in interviews, is the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
So
and that's a tremendous compliment, considering I've only been doing this for about a year and a half. So to the attendees, thank you for just being a part of it.
Thanks for being so patient, everyone. I can see all the lovely affirmations going all the way down. And I can see some of my past and present students in there as well. I see Toki there.
This is
just
great.
all that streamed on there.
I hope you guys had a great time with this, and definitely maybe we can part two this down the road.
For sure.
And but guys, on behalf of CGMA, my name is Frank Cordero, and it really was truly a pleasure to host this webinar. And thank you very much. And signing off, Patrick.
Okay.
You're a gem,
Thanks,
man.
Frank.
Brother from another part of the world when it comes to love for drawing. And, this is really special in more ways than you know. So, well, I'm going to let you get back to your life, and enjoy. Where do you living now again?
Brisbane, Australia.
Oh, my God. I'm sure that's got to be an amazing place to live.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, you go enjoy Brisbane. Attendees, thank you again for sticking around. And I guess we'll see you next time. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Frank.
Take care. No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.